this will go to. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. As you continue to get your coffee, we remind you that the session is about to begin in a few minutes. Please make your way back to your seats with your lids on your coffee cups, and off we go. 2 minutes. Make your way back. Thank you. Hello everyone, enjoy your coffee. Just a reminder to make your way back. We are about to begin 1 minute before the session begins. We'd love to see you here, your coffee cups with your way back.
Well, welcome back, everyone, after coffee. I obviously did not use my headmaster's voice when I suggested everybody should come back for 11:30. I must do better next time. But we'll move on. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our new head of finance, Nicola Robinson. Nicola, where are you? You're very welcome. And we trust you will find it a blessing and be a blessing when you come to Edge Hill and work with the team there. I'm going to ask our secretary if she would explain your role to us And maybe at the same time she might be explaining it to you. You never know.
Thank you, Mr. Lay Leader, and delighted that Nicola's able to be here. Nicola, as you've said, sir, is our new head of finance, so we'll be working with you on your circuits. Will be one of the important points of contact as we continue to develop the new finance system, and she will be a wonderful guide to you through that and in as we develop budgets and continue to develop our new way of working. Nicola, would you stand again so people can see your face? And may I pray just as you stand. Lord, we're so thankful for Nicola, and pray your blessing on her as she begins this new work, that you would bless her as she serves this part of your church, and that the church would be a blessing to her as we partner in the gospel together. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.
And now we come to the report from the Governance Board, which will be introduced by its chair, Mr. Tony O'Connor. Thank you, Tony. On page 18, and the agenda is on page 39.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm sorry that I'm about to introduce the most boring part of conference, but you'd be glad to know that about 20 minutes ago, I was told that my address that was timed for me at about an hour and 10 minutes had to be cut down to 45 minutes. So I am going to go through this at a rate of knots, and I hope that you can keep up with me. So my name is Tony O'Connor. I'm the chair of the Governance Board. And this is a new entity, as you know, that was only put in place last year. So we are in a learning phase here. We're trying to do what we can and interact with conference as well as we can do. So after this, I would love to have lots of feedback from you as to what you think works and what doesn't work. Did we give you enough information? Did we give you too much information? Is the format in which we present the information the right format? So talk to me or talk to any other member of the Governance Board, and I'll point them out to you later on. So we would really want your feedback. So I'm going to go through very quickly all the work that the Governance Board did during the year. There are slides, and you can watch them. I'll pay some attention to them. Some I won't. There are some items that I have no slides for at all. So we'll see how it goes. At the end of the conference, or at the end of the presentation, we will move the resolution that you accept the Governance Board report, and then there will be time for questions. But I would ask you to keep your questions until the end. Okay, so moving rapidly on, folks. No, I can't see that. Isn't that terrible? The Governance Board, set up last year by 2021, we were responsible for the day-to-day management, control, can I read it out? Control, direction, administration, and management of the affairs of the church. So what does that mean? What do we do? It might be easier to say what we don't do. We don't get involved in the day-to-day management of the church. That's the role of the General Secretary and her department. Okay, so we don't do things directly. We don't get involved in the departments. We don't get involved in local churches, local societies. We oversee what people do, and we check that they're doing it well. So we report back to you every year as to how that's going. Conference remains the ultimate body. This is important, okay? Conference is the ultimate governance body of the church, not the Governance Board. So that's why we have to come back to you and ask you to endorse everything that we do on an annual basis. Conference delegates are no longer the charity trustees. It might surprise you to know that last year, if you were here, you were a charity trustee of the church with all the obligations and the responsibilities that go with that. But that's no longer the case. Now the Governance Board members, the 15 members of the Governance Board, are the charity trustees. So you are free now to just concentrate on vision and theological matters and connection buildings, and the business end of running the church has gone away from conference. So this report is going to take about an hour and a half with all the resolutions. Last year, we would have spent a day or more than a day going through the same amount of business, but that has been passed over to the Governance Board. And we have tried to do that during the year. So we try to do that by finding out, are things working effectively? Is everybody doing the job that they're supposed to be doing? We try to do that by making sure that our finances are in order. We try to do that by making sure that we're meeting all the legislation responsibilities that we have as a major charity. And we try to do that by making sure that those legislation responsibilities don't overwhelm us as a church, that we remember that we're not a charity, a fundraising body, or an NGO, that we're a church. So we have to look at the charity regulations that come at us all the time, and there's lots of them, and not let them define us. Thank you, Wayne. Now I can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's how we go about our business. So let's quickly go through how the board is matched up. There's a 15-member board, partly ex officio, partly elected. The ex officio members are the president, the general secretary, the past president, the president designate, the lay leader, and the chair of the statutory trustees. And they serve on the board for the length of their period in office. Then we have 8 people elected to the board, 3 ministers and 5 lay people, and it's 3 and 5 in order to balance the overall balance on the board between lay and ministerial members. So the members elected by conference last year were the Reverend Harold Agnew, the Reverend David Campton, the Reverend Nigel Mackey, Mr. John Clark, Mr. Paul Cummings, Mr. Gillian Kingston, Mrs. Laura Griffith, and Mr. David Best. And I would ask all of them people to stand up now so that you can see who they are. You know the people on the podium here, but everybody else, so blame them. Don't blame me. Okay. As I said, Tom McKnight, the past president for last year, was a member of the board, but he had to take leave of absence for the duration of the board, so he wasn't registered as a charity trustee. Everybody else was. So we follow a regular agenda. We meet every month. We have developed a board policy manual that sets out in more detail than what's in the manual of laws how we go about our business, how we run our meetings, how we take decisions, how we vote if we ever have to vote, and we never have had to have a vote up to this. So the conduct of the meetings is all set out in the board policy manual, and that's on in Teams on the resources if you want to watch it. Now, I'm very happy to say that the board, to my mind, has worked very, very well this year. Everybody has been very actively involved in it. Everybody has been very constructive in it. Everybody has read all the papers that we send out before the meetings. It's all done in a very kind of logistically important way, and it works. And we are quite happy with the way that we are doing our business, we think, but you can enlighten us if you don't think that that's right. Can I give a very quick mention to Mrs. Elaine Barnett sitting down here? Who is the secretary of the board. And it's no exaggeration to say that if I didn't have Elaine beside me, keeping me on track and keeping track of everything that we say and do and keeping the minutes right and all of that, that it would have been a gargantuan task. So thank you very much, Elaine, for all of your work. Okay, we have a number of committees. The main committee is the Audit, Risk and Budget Committee. That's set out in the Manual of Laws, but because of the workload, we split that into 3 subcommittees. We have the Audit and Assurance Committee, the Finance and Budget Committee, and the General Assurance Committee. And very, very quickly, the Audit and Assurance Committee looks after the audit and the overview of the finances. The Finance and Budget Committee looks after the day-to-day finances and works very closely with the finance department. They also look after the comprehensive assessment and the stipends and allowances. Am I talking too fast? I'm looking at people smiling at me. I have to, because I have to meet Heather's timeline. Okay? The General Assurance Committee looks after things that are non-financial. So we're looking at, for instance, our relationship with associated bodies like Gurteen College. How does that match up? Is their governance procedures and management in line with our governance procedures? Because we have to do this again under charity legislation. That's the sort of thing that the General Assurance Committee will do. Okay, moving quickly on. Okay, an important part, financial oversight. Now, this year was a very difficult year, or the past year was a very difficult year for our finance department, and they were overwhelmed by the things that affected them, like COVID, like trying to get a brand new account system in, which turns into a gargantuan task. And I have to pay tribute here to all the local treasurers who got on board with this and took on board the training, because it is a big system and it does take training. And we are gradually getting there, but it's been a slower process than we thought it would be, and it has eaten up a huge amount of man hours or woman hours, as the case may be, in the finance department. So we had a new budgeting system which we are getting off the ground. It's not fully in there, but it'll be in there by next year. Staff pressures that come and go, and the CFO, Gillian Laney, decided that she was going to leave us in March, which was a pity, but she moved on to other things. And I want to again record the governance board's thanks to Gillian. She worked extremely hard for the last couple of years, and we wish her all the very best in her new role. You've just met her replacement, who's very, very welcome. So, all of this has meant that the audited accounts that we hoped to bring you at this conference are not ready. We had to push back the audit for the church accounts, and that will now be done in September. It'll be finished by the end of September in time for all our statutory reporting periods. But it means that I don't have audited accounts. Now, I understand that this is not unusual, going back over past conferences, that we never had up-to-date accounts, but we wanted to bring up-to-date accounts to you, and it's a disappointment to us that we can't. From next year on, we will have on. So what can I say about the finances of the church? Bearing in mind that these are unaudited figures, and that's the caveat, but I don't expect them to change. The things we can say are all positive. Right? Spending by connectional departments won't exceed budgeted levels for the current year. We know that. The overall cash position of the church is very sound. Central connectional cash plus investments grew from 24 million at the end of 2020 to 27 million at the end of 2021. On top of that, I got figures only last weekend for individual societies and the societies that grew their cash balance or didn't grow their cash balance. And I can tell you that in Northern Ireland, the overall increase in cash held by local societies was 9.95%. So the overall increase went up by cash balance went up by 9.9%, and in the south of Ireland, it went up by 7.37%. So overall, the cash position of the church is very good. The devil, of course, is in the detail. And when you look at the individual figures, 45% of the societies in Northern Ireland recorded a decrease in cash, and 38% of the societies in the south of Ireland recorded a decrease in cash. So the devil is in the detail. Overall, we're in good standing. Based on central figures alone, connectional funds alone, we have more than enough to cover the reserves policy of the church. And I'm going to speak more about the reserves policy of the church later on. But we're well covered in terms of our reserves, just going on central funds, never mind adding in the local funds, which we would do. So we have no reports of fraud or malpractice. And we reappointed Ernst & Young as the auditors for December 2020, or this current year, up to December 2022. Charity registration was a big deal, was made out of this when we were talking at conference last year. We were hoping that the governance changes would allow us to register as a single charity and get all the benefits that accrued from that. And that happened during the year. The Charity Commission in Northern Ireland accepted the government's changes as being adequate, and we were registered as a single charity, and we are now registered as a single charity in Northern Ireland. We were already registered as a single charity in the south. So the downside of that is that the poor old finance department that I talked to you about earlier on gets more work to do. The good side of it is that societies get less work to do. Not that they were doing the work, but the work that they would have had to do in filing reports and drawing up policies and finding charity trustees. All of that is gone now. They won't have to do that. It's all done centrally. Our position as a major charity will continue to have implications for our governance policies and procedures going forward. This is a pain in the neck, but it's nothing that we can get away from. We are a major charity, and we are governed by the laws of major charities. And no matter how often we protest, but we're a church. You know, the Charity Commission doesn't see it that way. So we are bound by all the legislation that covers charity, and we just have to get on with that and not let it impinge too much on the work that we do as a church. And as a governance board, we are very, very aware when we're dealing with all the matters that we are a church. We don't run the place like it's a business. We don't run the place like it's a major charity. We run it like it's a church, or we seek to do that. So when you hear me referring frequently to charity legislation, don't be downhearted by that and saying, oh, God, we've become a major charity. This is our focus now. It's not our focus. It's just something that we have to do. So moving on quickly again to the COVID-19, the pandemic, most significant event in the life of the church over the past year, and the past 2 years really. I just want to give tribute and thanks to the COVID management team who did a sterling job. Really did a fantastic job in keeping all of us going during the year, juggling with different legislation in different parts of the country and trying to manage the whole thing. They did a really great job. But, you know, it had a great effect on us. Our young people, especially, and our old people were greatly affected by this. And again, we have to give tribute to people like the IMYC, individuals like Ruth Matthews down the south, whom I know did a huge amount of work in bringing out resources that helped our young people get through all of this. And we really do need to acknowledge the fact that we were well served on this. The long-term effects, well, that's going to go on for a while. We have to see, we have to reflect, we have to learn from what went on there and see how can it benefit us? What can we learn from it? And we're all in the middle of doing that. Now, something that's dear to everybody's heart, the comprehensive assessment. This was looked at by the Finance and Budget Committee back in March. Okay. At that time, the available returns from societies indicated that there was a good, strong financial position. So they reckoned that there was no need to further reduce the comprehensive assessment for 2023. It had been reduced in previous years. So they recommended an increase of 2% to 1.3 million. And the Governance Board adopted that recommendation. Now, we're going to have to keep this under review because we all know what's happening with the cost of living and how that's affecting us all. So this will be kept under constant review. You can see all the details of the individual amounts in the appendices. Okay. Another one that's dear to our hearts, the stipends, allowances and salaries. And I have a bit to say about this. This was taken over from the Stipends and Allowances Board, which was disbanded as part of the governance programme, and this job was given over to the Finance and Budget Subcommittee. Now, normally what happens is that a recommendation is brought to conference for implementation next January. Now, in actual fact, what that means is that sometime last March or April, a recommendation is arrived at in time to get the conference and then be implemented in January. That means that the recommendation in January is based on 9-month-old figures. Okay, now that's clearly not good enough. So the committee looked at this year, around about the end of last year, and they decided that the increase that was put in place last year for this January gone wasn't enough, given the cost of living increases and all the rest of it. So we thought that we had to do something about that, although we couldn't do much. We had to depend on what you can afford. But as a result of that, we put in an additional 1% on man's expenses for the Northern Ireland. We didn't have to do the same for the South of Ireland because theirs is adjusted automatically as a percentage of real expenses. And we put an additional 1% on top of the previously agreed levels of salary increase for all our employees. So this is an example, if I can point out, of the Governance Board being able to react a little bit more quickly than Conference would have been able to react in the past. So we can react to the information that we have in real time, rather than going 9 months in arrears, which is very unsatisfactory. So we also looked at the whole process and procedures around stipends, allowances and salaries. And sadly we found that it's just not up to scratch for a number of reasons. Okay? Many of our employees, most of our employees, are paid at minimum wage levels. And if you take all the time that employees work that are not paid for, all the extra hours, especially at a local level, they're actually working for less than minimum wage level. And we should be at least thinking of what a living wage should be. That would be more in keeping with the ethos of us as a church and as the value that we put on our employees. So I don't think that the current system is good enough. The system of stipends and allowances for ministers is very, very complicated and very cumbersome. And when you take into account the differences between the two jurisdictions, trying to keep parity between them, it's practically impossible. It's a bad system. The pension schemes that we have are all old. We have too many of them, and they're all out of date. They're not in keeping with modern pension practice. So for all of these reasons, we decided that something has to be done about this. So we have a working party. A working party has been established to conduct a fundamental review of this area under the chair of Paul Cummings, who is the chair of the finance subcommittee. Now, this is a huge, complicated area, so nothing is going to happen very quickly, and nothing is going to happen without consultation all across the board. We will probably have an interim report ready for conference next year. We have to do things like do a fundamental examination of the pension schemes, for instance. Then we have to try and look at the tax implications between North and South, or the different type of expenses that we pay, and the different type of levels of salary that we pay, etc. So it's very, very complicated. So we will be trying to bring in something that's more practical, that's very equitable, that bears in mind the ability of societies to pay for the thing in the first place. All of these things will have to be borne in mind. And as I said, there will be lots of consultation, but this is ongoing, and it will be ongoing for a while. I would imagine that next year's increase will be done in the same way as this year's, as an interim measure, but I hope that by the following year we will have agreed with you all on a new way forward. The next thing I want to talk about very, very quickly is the alternating ministry scheme. I have no slide for this, but you will be aware that we had an alternating ministry scheme where we worked with the Presbyterian Church of Ireland, and we had a number of congregations that were dual congregations, if you like. Under that big bugbear charity legislation, that is no longer allowed, because you can't have two charities operating on the one entity. So the old General Committee agreed that we would have to change this, and the congregations would have to go one way or the other. So Christ Church Limerick became an MCI congregation, the United Church Galway became a Presbyterian congregation, and Christ Church Sandymount became a Methodist congregation. And a scheme of reassessment or realignment or reallocation was made for all the property, etc., that went with all those. All that came into play on the 1st of May. Now, it's a great regret to us as a church that we had to do this, but we really had no choice about it. It just simply didn't work from a legislative point of view. The Mission Partnership Forum that oversaw all this remains in place to explore any opportunities for partnerships and other forms that might occur. So we're not giving up on it completely. Now I'm just going to hand over to Tom Miller, because you normally get a statutory trustees report, and they now report to the governance board rather than reporting straight to conference. But we thought that might be too much of a shock to the system, so for this year we're going to let Tom come up and make his report as usual. So I'll ask Tom to take the next few.
Mr. President, Mr. Lay Leader, members of conference, the report that Tony has referred to is on page 119 of the conference agenda, and I'm going to assume that you've all read it in detail. I want to mention, Mr. President, 3 items briefly, and the first is to emphasise the trustees' commitment to fulfilling their responsibility as detailed in that report, so that the work of the church can be supported to help achieve our objective, that the people called Methodists might live wholeheartedly as followers of Jesus for the transformation of the world. That's the first commitment that I make on behalf of the trustees. The second, Mr. President, is to mention that the trustees have been reviewing its governance structures, and as a result of this, the limited service of to 10 years agreed at conference last year is now being implemented and will be completed over the next few years. The effect of this is that 5 trustees who have served over many years step down this year, and I want to name and acknowledge them. They are the Reverend Dr. Edmund Mawhinney, the Reverend Robin Roddy, the Reverend David Mullen, Mr. Stanley Graham, and Mr. Albert Sherrard. And you'll see from the conference that together they have served the trustees for a total of 158 years. Not one lifetime, 2 lifetimes, almost 3 lifetimes between them. Mr. President, the length of service given by these trustees has been matched and exceeded by their commitment and contribution, and I wish publicly to endorse the thanks expressed in the report and to ask conference to say thank you to each of them. That thanks, Mr. President, is equally extended to the other retirees mentioned in the report, Lynn Pasley and Tony O'Connor. Tony holds the record for being the shortest time as a trustee. He was appointed at conference last year in June and retired in July. But that, of course, was as a result of his appointment as chair of the governance board. And the final thing I want to mention, Mr. President, is with regard to investing. The trustees have been focusing sharply on ethical investing, and this has become a major part of our investment policy that is consistent with the moral stance and teachings of our faith. Our investment managers, Epworth, have been directed to adopt a social, environmental and ethical stance in keeping with the aims of our church, and there will be more communications about this, sir, in the coming weeks. Mr. President, I commend the report.
That's one way I keep my you have the rest of mine there, it doesn't matter. That's one way of making sure that I don't speak for too long. Rob the rest of my notes. Okay, moving swiftly along. And again, I apologize if I'm speaking too quickly or going through this too fast, because I am under time pressure. Safeguarding is one of the things that was brought to our attention during the year. The Safeguarding Board reports into us. So the Safeguarding Board was appointed by conference in 2020, and it works with Nicholas Blair, our Safeguarding Officer. The things most highlight in their report was that Mr. Lindsay Conway was appointed as chair of the CSB, and we're very fortunate to have a man of his stature and his experience to take over the chairmanship of the board, and we really want to express our thanks for him for taking on this task. Various training went on for youth and children's leaders. The ministries team worked with Nicholas Blair in training for the Safe Place initiative, and we worked with the MWI and the ministries team to develop resources in support of domestic violence programs. So we also instituted a past case review run by Stephen Skuse. And this is a look back over all the cases that were reported to us over the decades, just to make sure that everything is okay. So Stephen works under the chair of Dr. Deborah Welsper, and again I want to thank Deborah for coming on board, another very experienced person in this area. and we're delighted to have her expertise. Now, they're looking at this as they speak. No major issues have been identified as yet, but they have identified a number of places where our procedures were not as good as they should have been, and they are making adjustments as we go along whenever they find anything like that. So that's ongoing. They will bring a full report to conference in 2023. Now, policy reviews. One of the boring things that the governance board has to do is look at the policies of the church. Every major organization, every major charity, and every major church should have a set of documented policies that set out what we do and how we do it over a whole range of different events. One of the returns that we had to work with for the charity regulator in the south of Ireland over the course of the year was a 40-page return full of questions about how we did it and what policies we had in place and what they covered and how we followed them and how we updated them, etc. So this goes on forever. So we will be undertaking a review of all our policies last year and in the coming years. And this year we looked at all of the policies that are mentioned there. I'm not going to go down through them because I don't have time, but I will be talking about the reserves policy in a little while. The investment policy, Tom has indicated that was heavily involved with who invests, how we invest, how much we invest, what type of funds we invest in, etc. All of the rest of that, I don't think I really have time to go through it. The ministries team churns out policies to beat the band. And we just say, yes, that's terrific, thank you very much, and off you go and keep it going. So let me talk about the reserves policy for the moment. The reserves policy of the church sets out how much you keep in reserve to meet unexpected expenses. So if all the income of the church stopped coming in, how long could you keep going? Okay, so the reserves policy decides what are reserves and how long should that be. So we drafted a new reserves policy that set out that our reserves should be enough for 9 months. That's 9 months of total group expenditure. So if we never got another penny from today, we should have enough cash and liquid investments or liquefiable investments to keep going, covering everything for 9 months. Okay? This is actually an increase over the previous level of 6 months that was nominally pursued by the statutory trustees. Now, the actual level of reserves in December 2020, okay, what are they? The actual level of unrestricted reserves, now I'm talking about cash and liquefiable investments. I'm not talking about restricted money, and I'm not talking about fixed assets or property, because they cannot be turned into cash quickly. Unrestricted reserves are cash and our investments that we can cash in fairly quickly. They amounted to 44,000 or 44 million at the end of 2020. Projected annual expenditure total would be 28 million. This means that the church is holding 19 months of reserves. Okay, 19 months, not 9. Okay, 9 months would be 21 million. So we should be holding 21 million where we're holding 44 million. Now this raises all sorts of questions for us as a church. Why are we holding so much money? People give us money to further the aims of the church. If we're putting that money in a bank and leaving it sit there, well then we are not furthering the aims of the church. Now I'm not suggesting that anybody's hoarding money or that people are reluctant to spend money. I think this is just a situation that has built up over the years. But it's at a ridiculous position now, where we've got 44 million in reserves where we should only have 21 million. So we need to start a conversation, folks, about what this means for us. Right? It doesn't mean that we run out and we start spending money left, right, and centre because, oh, we got lots of money. We don't. We don't do that. Anything we do will have to be done in line with our mission strategies, in line with our ethos, in line with proper governance work. Right? Where are we going to spend it? Is it going to be a benefit to our people? right? But we need to start talking about this, and we need to start changing our thinking a little bit. Because ever since I came into this church, I've been told, oh, there's no money, we're broke. We're not broke. We're not broke. So over the course of the next years, and I'm talking about years, not over the course of the next 1 or 2 years, but over the course of the next 5, 6, 7 years, it would be the governance board's policy that these level of reserves be brought back down to a more reasonable level. By the way, if we don't do that, the charity board, those horrible people again, will come to us and say, why are you keeping all this money? Get rid of it. It's not what you have it for. So if we don't do it, we will be asked to do it. So we need to start a conversation. That's all I'm saying today. Let's start a conversation about this. Okay, I want to move on to property very quickly. I've talked about that. Okay, the property board, working away, doing a great job. Highlights of this process are the new application process launched in 2020 is going very well. The visitation program will be relaunched because it came to a stop over COVID. Circuits are reminded to gain approval before commencing works. If you're looking to go to the Joseph Rank Trust, you have to have agreement in principle. And again, we thank the Joseph Rank Trust for their support over the years. There is a continuing problem with property returns from societies. In the last 2 years, we only averaged about 40% of returns. That means we don't have 60% visibility on what's happening with our property. This is not a situation that can be sustained. We need to know what's going on. So I ask anybody who's involved in the property in your local society, if you are having a difficulty filling out the forms, or if there's nobody there designated to do it, give the estates manager a ring and talk it through with him and get some help to do it. Okay, but we do need to start bringing these forward. The Governance Board and the Property Board wish to thank Mrs. Elizabeth Curry, who was the Visitation Secretary for a number of years, and she's stepping down, and that role is going to be taken over by Simon Kingham, the Estates Manager. So thank you to Elizabeth for all your work. And I also want to express a deep level of thanks to the outgoing chair of the Property Board, Keith Irvine, who's done tremendous work for the last 6 years, first as a treasurer and then as chairman of the Property Board. Keith has been instrumental in bringing in a lot of the procedural changes that happened over the last few years, and he's done a fantastic job, but he's stepping down now. So our thanks go out to Stephen. Moving on to the Church Development Board, headed by Tom Clark. Okay, again, I want to acknowledge their work and their dedication and record our thanks to them for doing the work that they did. Highlights of their report are for that 2 years running now, we've had no new applications for church development status, but they have started some preliminary discussions lately. They have a few ongoing schemes in Ballinafay and Ballinamallard and Braniel, and they're exploring schemes in Cavan and Blanchardstown. And again, they urge people to come forward early. And that, although what I'm going to say next is probably going to change that. We looked at the whole area of property management in the church. Excuse me. And we found that there were too many agencies involved. If you think about it, there's the Property Board, there's the Church Development Board, there's the Home Missions Department, there's the Connectional Team, there's the District Superintendents, there's all the local property agents who are dealing with it. Loads and loads of people, all involved. Too many, often overlapping roles and responsibilities. The roles of the district superintendents and the connectional team that were introduced over the last 4 or 5 years have not been reflected fully in the way that we do things on property. And we weren't adequately resourcing our estates management team to do this. So we reckon that we needed to have a look at this, so we established a working party, and the working party consisted of the chair, Doug Edmondson, whom we all know, who had a lot of experience from the Home Missions Department in dealing with manse property. We had the Reverend Mark Forsyth, the Home Missions Secretary, the Reverend Tom Clark, who was the chair of the Church Development Board and also a member of the Property Board, Keith Irvine, the chair of the Property Board, the 3 district superintendents, Stephen Skuse, Andrew Doherty and Philip Agnew, Mrs. Gillian Gilmore for IMYC to give us a completely different perspective on things, and Simon Kingham, the estate manager. So they sat down as a group and they looked at the whole system of property and how the different bodies interact with each other. And they came up with a whole series of recommendations which the governance board have adopted. And I'll go through them at the moment. But before I go to that, the context needs to be explained to you. This was not a criticism of existing boards or a criticism of existing people and how things were done. It was a look at the system to see, did it properly fit what we're actually doing on the ground at the moment. It was trying to recognize the fact that a lot of the property decisions now are coming through the DSs and through the connectional team, not straight to the property board or not straight to the church development board. It was trying to recognize that a realignment needs to take place, and this is what the recommendations come. So it's an overview. The details of the implementation of these recommendations will take some time to work out. How do you transfer duties from one body to another body, for instance? And we'll do this over the pace of the next 6 months, should you accept these recommendations. So what did the property board or the property working party come up with? First of all, they said that we needed an integrated strategy was required to link with our mission aims. We have a mission strategy, but we don't have a property strategy to link in with that, and we need to detail it, because otherwise you don't know how to make decisions. When you get conflict, you get two property development proposals, for instance, and they're both missionally sound. How do you choose between them if you've got limited resources? So we need some sort of an overview strategy. All major financial decisions to be approved by the governance board. The working party initially said that all major investment property decisions should be approved by the governance board, but the governance board increased that to all major property, so mission-led properties, but we're talking about significant ones, over 250,000, for instance. They should just come past the governance board for final approval. That's just good governance. Responsibility for MANS is to pass from the Home Mission Department to the Estates Department, working with the district superintendents. This is something that the Home Missions Department has been looking to for some time. When you think about it, we have a part-time Home Mission Secretary. What should he be interested in all the time working? He should be interested in mission. Should he spend half his time dealing with the MANS down in Limerick or the MANS up in Belfast? It's a waste of his time. So that's been passed over to the estates managers working with the district superintendents. The Church Development Board has been superseded by the connectional team and will therefore be disbanded. This is a recognition of the fact that all mission-related property decisions are coming through the DSs now. The local teams are working with the DSs. They're well established before they get up to the connectional team. The connectional team is looking to see how it fits in with the overall mission strategy of the church. And then it's going to the property board. That means that the decision on who to allocate money to is being taken from the property board to the connectional team. And that brings the decision closer to local societies, local circuits, and more integrated into the mission strategy element of the church, away from the technical aspect that is the property board. So the property board will be reconstituted to become a smaller technical group. The Church Development Board will be disbanded fairly quickly, and the church development status is no longer a relevant status because, again, it comes through the district superintendents. And the decision on loans and grants will be taken by the connectional team. So these are fairly wide-ranging changes, but they recognise the reality of what's going on the ground. The Working Party also made a couple of small, minor, if you like, recommendations. All title to property held in local trust to be transferred from the statutory trustees within 3 to 5 years. This has actually been on the books for a long time. But for one reason or another, it's not happening. So we want to see it happening. We want to see the local trust being transferred over to statutory trustees, because that's the right place for it to be, and conference decided this years ago. The existing serious shortfall in property returns that I mentioned earlier on, that's only 40%, has to be addressed, and we will take steps to address that and to help local property stewards to get that up and running properly. And we have to set up a set of standards and criteria for mission-led properties. We have standards and criteria for our manses, for instance, but we don't have them for mission-led properties, so we want to bring that on board. So there's a lot of changes there. Okay, and we're going to try and implement them over the next 6 months or so, over the course of the coming year, should all this be passed by your good selves. Okay, I'm going to skip the connectional team report because basically I'm just going to talk there about the fact that they brought in a good strategy and the fact that they're dealing with the size of circuits and the ongoing work around it. You have to realize that there's a distinct division between what the connectional team does and what the governance board does. The connectional team looks after the actual coal face of the church, all the workings of the church, all the mission elements of the church, how the local societies and circuits, how they get on, what they do, etc., etc. Governance board is the governance board. We just look after the overview stuff, the big picture stuff. Okay, so the connectional team report into us formally, but in actual fact, the whole of the rest of the conference is going to be what the connectional team are doing. So board and committee reports, this is what we used to spend conference doing. All board and committee reports that previously came before conference now become before the governance board. So we used to spend a day listening to reports at conference. They all come to us instead now. So during the year we considered reports from 28 boards and committees and associated bodies, and we accepted the recommendations and the nominations, etc., that was in there. We didn't reject anything. There was nothing untoward anywhere along the line. And I really want to express my thanks to all of the people who worked so hard in all of these boards and committees at local level and the connectional level. We really couldn't do without them, and we're blessed to have them. All the individual reports are included in the agenda, in the Blue Book. If you want to read the individual reports, they're all there, but there are nearly 30 of them. Good luck to you if you want to read through them, but I'm sure you read the ones that are of particular interest to you. Okay, quick word on governance board membership, and you'll be glad to hear that I'm very nearly finished. The normal practice for board membership is that a nominations committee will be appointed in January, and that will bring a panel to conference for election to the elected positions on the governance board, of which there are 8. Okay, governance board people serve for 3 years. Because we're only in our first year, there's nobody stepping down this year, so there are no vacancies. So no nominations committee was set up to bring anything, so there will be no election for governance board members. Really, it shouldn't happen until year 3, but probably will happen next year because we'll start the rollover process next year. It's important that we keep continuity, but that we also keep on freshening up the board all the time. So this will come into play next year. I have to pay tribute again. Hazel will be tired of people paying tribute to her at this stage, but she has been an excellent board member over the year, and she is stepping down. So thank you, Hazel, for your work on the governance board. I also want to thank the outgoing president, or the outgoing past president, Tom McKnight. Although Tom was on leave of absence for the duration of the year, he was very supportive of our work, and his absence was a matter of regret to us all because we missed his insight. So we will continue on to normal practice, if you like, from next year on, and then it'll be a rollover period. Blank screen. Okay. I'm nearly done. I just want to say 3 quick things, if you would bear with me, before we pass this over for discussion. Just things that have occurred to me over the space of the year. The first is the need that we have to balance the requirements of governance of a large charity, a large organization, with the fact that we are a church. I've mentioned this a couple of times. This is a tension all the time. because we are bound by legislation. There are things that we just have to do, and they might seem to be really boring to most people, but we just have to do them. And we are all to the benefit, to be honest, if we do them right. And if we have a well-run organisation, a well-run body, it's to our benefit to do them. But nobody wants to listen to policies and all of this sort of stuff. We just want to get on with our mission work in the church. So the governance board is really, really, really aware of this. And we keep it at the forefront of our minds at all the time. So please don't be concerned that we are turning into a business or we are turning into some NGO. We're not. The second thing that occurred to me over the course of the year is the sheer complexity of the organisation that is the Methodist Church in Ireland. We all tend to work in our own local society or in our own work in our own local circuit, and we forget, because we don't see it, the hard work and the dedication of all the connectional departments and the amount that they do to support the church, because it goes unseen, and I would say a lot of the time unappreciated. I think about the work of the General Secretary's department. I mean, this lady just works. She doesn't do anything else. She just works. I think about the IMYC. I think about the finance department. I think about the estates manager or the ministries team. All of these are working for the benefit of the church. They're all under-resourced, every single one of them. And they're all staffed by people who are purely dedicated to helping our church achieve its aims. We need to start thinking more about this. You know, are we doing ourselves a disservice by not resourcing our support teams as well as we should do? And we need to say a big thank you to every one of them, and I do so now. And the last thing that I just want to say, and this has been repeated before, and it's a little bit of a mantra sometimes, but sometimes mantras can be just mantras. And that is that we are a connection, and the importance of being a connection. Okay? Our church is facing many challenges. Right? Society is changing all around us. Okay? Organised religion has been marginalised. We have falling numbers, and we have had for a long time. We've got small circuits, small societies that are really struggling. So we've got a lot of pressure. We are all being asked to change, and we are changing rapidly. I mean, the amount of change that's gone through the last couple of conferences is just, it's unbelievable, really, when you think about it. And change is very difficult. It's very hard to accept it. It's very hard to get used to the new way of doing things, even if we grudgingly accept that it's necessary. There's always a hankering, we didn't have to do this before. This is not the way we did things before. But this is a modern world. We have to change. Our ministers are under constant pressure to come up with new forms of ministry and new ways of reaching out, at the same time maintaining all the old ways that we do things, because they're important as well. So we're under a lot of stress. Connection is what's going to get us through all of this. The idea that we are a family of churches, not just a local church, not just one circuit, that we're part of something bigger. I think that we really have to bring this into our actual day-to-day work and really recognize it and share our burdens and share our resources and share our knowledge and share our stories and actively work together and build processes and build mechanisms where we can allow that to happen. Build it into the way we do our business. Connection is our biggest strength as far as I can see. It's what marks us out from everybody else, and it's what's going to keep us, I think, successful and vibrant and live going forward. So the good news from my point of view is that we are rising to this challenge. I can see it all over the place, at a local level, at a national level. We are rising to the challenge. We are adopting, we are changing at an unprecedented rate. Okay? The governance board is committed to doing its utmost to assist every element of our church to grow and to flourish in these challenging times. And with God's help, we will do just that. So thank you.
Before I ask for any comments or questions, the Secretary would like to make a short announcement.
So grateful, Mr. Lay Leader, to Mr. O'Connor for presenting that report and for the heart for God and for this church that lies behind it. Just a couple of procedural matters. We want everyone who wants an opportunity to speak to this significant report to have that opportunity. The Manual of Laws states that responses to a report should be 5 minutes. To allow a breadth of responses, my proposal to the conference is that we move that to 3 minutes. If conferences agree to that, then a green light will go on when there's 1 minute left, a red light will go on when the time is up. So I'll move that in a minute, sir. And the second thing to say is that when people come to the lectern to speak, if you could say your name and where you're from, either your circuit or your team or department, that would help us as we listen, sir. But the formal resolution to move is that responses to the report be limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm sure that has been heard. So if you have a comment or a question, would you like to come now to the podium?
Just a comment on the statement.
Would you say who you are?
Sorry, David Miller, Dundonald Methodist Church in the Knox Circuit. Just thinking about stipend and allowance, and in the prayer focus, it says that sabbaticals are a gift from the church to the ministers. It's a strange gift that costs the church nothing. When a minister goes on sabbatical, his stipend continues to be paid by the local society, and as well as that, the cover has also to be paid by the local society. When some churches are struggling to meet as circuit treasurer, I know that some of our churches are struggling just to make ends meet, and when we are paying the stipend, and we're also going to have to pay for sabbatical cover, I think it's something that could be looked at, especially in the light of the fact that the church seems to have so much money that it needs to use, and it certainly could be used by local societies and circuits.
Oh, yeah.
Hi there, Gillian Gilmore, IMYC. Tony, just wanted to add some things to your list for your excess money that you have in reserves. I have had 2 conversations since I arrived at conference, which was just last night, around churches looking to invest in their youth and children's work, but they have no money to do that. And one before I came. So if you want to know what to spend some of that money on, I'd love to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I knew I was going to regret bringing that up.
Can we ask, first of all, rather than bring up another topic, are there any other questions regarding finance? Nigel?
Nigel Mackey, Wesley College, and privilege of sitting on the governance board as well. It isn't merely a comment, because timing is really important within the kingdom of God, but the reserves that have been built up because of people like Neil Payne, who overhauled the church finances at a time of grimness. And I can remember sitting through many conferences where Neil would have been cajoling us and encouraging us and pleading with us to get our finances in order. And it's through good stewardship of individuals like him that we now have this bounty. But the interesting conversation that many of us have been having, and certainly within my circle over the last few days, has been on when we cast our nets on the Doxy Mary, on the right part, on the correct part of the sea. And I think that as church, before we put our hand in our pocket to spend a penny, we need to be spending a considerable amount of time discerning the will of God in these matters. Timing is everything. And I think we need to be, as church, willing to say there have been occasions in the past where we have jumped, and with hindsight, we have to question whether or not we heard the call Yahweh correctly. And we have to put our hands up and say, actually, no, this cannot be right. So I think it is important as a connection that we actually, before we begin to spend, actually expend ourselves spiritually in seeking to hear what is it that Jesus Christ wants the people called Methodists in Ireland to be doing today, tomorrow, in a week, or in 10 years' time. That is absolutely critical. And I would be encouraging all in leadership to be pointing us in that direction. And I think then when we hear, as David spoke about this morning, people will be speaking of how lively our congregations are. And much more importantly, they'll be hearing stories of God moving in those places where our people are moving in that easy rhythm of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. Any more questions or comments on finance? Perhaps, Tony, you would like to respond to that?
The response I have is that I couldn't agree more with what Nigel said. I said earlier on we wanted to start a conversation. I also said we are not going to open the floodgates and start spending money left, right and centre, because that's just not how it works. So everything that we do think about going forward has to be done prudently. It has to be done in the context of who we are as a church and where we're going and what our mission aims are, etc. Okay? And not just at a local level, but across the board. We have to take a big picture connectional point of view on all of this. So I look forward to that conversation happening.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on any other aspect of that report? Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. President. Stephen Foster, North Tipperary. There's two aspects I want to... Well, firstly, I want to say just my admiration for the Governance Board and the incredible amount of work that they do. It would just absolutely scare me, so just to acknowledge that. I suppose under the ending of the alternating ministry scheme, just as having been the Methodist superintendent for Galway the last 3 years, I haven't had to do really anything to worry about at all, and I just want to pay tribute to the cooperation going on through that scheme. But I also want to raise concern about one of the church settings that over the last few years within that scheme, and I suppose the harshness that Sandymount Church has had to suffer these past few years. I suppose I find myself in ministry with LGBT people, north and south, but certainly in the south recently we've experienced a number of attacks, not least this past weekend, across the country. And so harshness is something that I think should be nowhere within the Church of Christ. And certainly as a church, the Methodist Church, in recent years, we've outlined very clearly the importance of good conversations and how we approach those conversations. Sadly, that has not been reciprocated by one of our ecumenical partners. And that has caused deep distress and illness for some of those involved. It has, I suppose, I've struggled with the silence of our own church during this time. And maybe I've wanted our church to speak up, but that has been... but I'm sorry that we couldn't, and I think it has left a perception among LGBT Christians that we've been possibly more content to side with institutionalism than speaking up for the marginalised. But I salute the courage of all involved in Sandymount. and hope that further persecution will not happen more widely for LGBT Christians or anyone connected or not with church. I suppose just also under board and committee reports, just maybe I'm conscious as the chairperson or a co-chair of a board that's still reporting the conference, I feel a sadness that we're not maybe hearing within conference from these different boards listed here and the powerful work that they do, and I just want to express that feeling of sadness about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Who's this?
For the opportunity to speak today. My name is Stephen Smirrell. I'm a member of the Sandymount congregation. Having assumed I might have 5 minutes, I might be 33 minutes and 20 seconds. Maybe you might just go with me. I'll rattle through it. Our congregation is situated in Dublin's leafy city centre village of Sandymount. The building was originally Methodist, opened in 1864, but for almost 50 years, until the 1st of May this year, it was one of the 3 remaining united congregations operated by the Presbyterians and Methodists under the alternating ministry scheme. The other 2 were Limerick, now Methodist, and Galway, now Presbyterian. Most here will have heard about the very public 3-year dispute our congregation became embroiled in over the subject of same-sex relationships. To say that the last few years have been difficult for our congregation would be a massive understatement. It has taken every ounce of our church council reserves in dealing with the Presbyterian authorities. My sole purpose in providing this minimal amount of background detail is to allow me to articulate our church council's shock and dismay, on top of everything else, at suddenly being informed on the 30th of June last year that the scheme was to be dissolved. The report on page 27 of the Book of Reports says that, and I quote, each of the 3 congregations were fully consulted in arriving at and preparing for changeover. That really hasn't been the experience of Sandymount, and I'm quickly going to say that I'm not saying that statement isn't true, just that is not the full story. Perhaps instead of consulted, the word advise might have been a better choice. Ending the scheme was a fait accompli. We had no choice in the matter. Here's 7 bullet points noting what the reality has been from Sandymount's perspective, and I stress, none of this is meant to be critical of any individuals, but rather comment on institutional policy and procedure. The whole process was rushed. 1, the whole process was rushed, and that's despite the deadline being extended by an additional 4 months. 2, there was no guidance on the process and practicalities for the 3 congregations deciding which way to jump, Presbyterian or Methodist governance. 3, ostensibly, new regulations set by the charity regulator, charity regulator caused the ending of the scheme, yet several requests for information and or sight of documents from the commissioner went unfulfilled. Decisions requiring the end of the scheme tended only to deal with legal practicalities and not pastoral issues. For instance, in the case of Sandymount, now under Sole Methodist government, what of the many people who self-identify as Presbyterian? And in Limerick, Presbyterian witness stretching back 370 years has ended. As in Galway, almost 200 years of Methodist witness has now ceased. 5, it goes without saying that the implementing the alternating ministry scheme required copious amounts of goodwill and pragmatism. While there's goodwill in abundance in implementing the new regime, pragmatism does seem to be in short supply. And 6, under Sole Methodist governance, what are we left with in Sandymount that reflects our congregation's Presbyterian heritage? Well, we have 2 sets of hymn books which we alternate. We have Presbyterian family and war memorials brought from the now demolished Sandymount Church, Presbyterian Church. We use Presbyterian communion silverware, and we have an agent for the Presbyterian Herald. Clearly, my point is that given our heritage, we aren't a typical Methodist society. And 7, for almost half a century, triennially, Sandymount has elected its leaders and, when required, elected those who went on to be ordained as elders. But leadership is now to be the gift of the minister, so I ask, in light of my 30 years in leadership, where is the pragmatism? What's missing is a wider vision that builds upon what has gone before, rather than inadvertently eradicating it. In church over the past few Sundays, I have read a statement relevant to our congregation's Presbyterian witness, in which I say the following. I've got about 20 words to go, in which I say this following. We have been assured by the Methodists that the ethos and heritage of our congregation will be both respected and honoured. These are fine words, but how will this be achieved? Last Sunday, there was some chat about the ending of the scheme, and I was encouraged to speak today about our experience to date and to summarise it in one word: disappointment. Page 193 of the Book of Reports refers to the work of the Mission Partnership Forum being continued for at least the next connectional year. I'm glad to hear this because I hope that what I have outlined above demonstrates that there remains issues yet to be resolved. Thank you very much for allowing me the extra few seconds.
Thank you.
Tom McKnight, retired minister of Donegal and absentee member of the governance board, governance board. Just one question simply is to do with when it talks about mission-led property, is that everything except investment-led property, or is there a more specific definition than that? So I could have just asked you, but I thought if other people may have the same questions.
Generally speaking, yes, it would be everything except investment.
Sorry, Tony, could you give that answer through the microphone?
Sorry, in broad terms, yes, it would be everything except unless investment-led property would be mission, because I can't think you're either doing something to further mission or you're doing something as an investment. So it's one or the other.
Thank you. Richard.
Richard Rowe, currently in between jobs. Just a word of thanks. A word pragmatism was mentioned earlier. This is a different sort of pragmatism, and that is with regards to the board taking on being the charity, our charitable trustees. I wept with delight nearly when I read that, because I've had to deal with Oscar in Scotland and other words in England in the last 20 years. And when you actually read the small print of what's involved in being a charitable trustee, it's quite worrying. So I want to say thank you and pay tribute to you for taking on that and for freeing up the rest of us from some significant stuff. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Anyone else for comment or question? No. Then, Tony, the report has been moved. Conference agreed?
I'm not sure which particular response that you want me to make a report. I responded as I thought was necessary. Was there anything that I didn't respond to? That's to do with the governance report.
Yes. Stephen's question is probably to do with the alternating ministry scheme, that you'd appreciate a response to that.
I just thought in the nature of conferencing that we should hear responses to the points that are made.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, Stephen, but is there a particular point that you would like me to respond to? Because you made quite a broad-ranging statement, and it wasn't really a question of, to my mind, listening to you, it wasn't really a question of questioning something particular in the report. It was more a statement that you wanted to make, so I wasn't sure that it required a response. If that's okay. Is there anybody else who would like to make a response to what Stephen? Andrew.
I'm Andrew Docherty, the Dublin District Superintendent. To respond to both Stephens, I don't want to refer to the AMS, but I do want to say that the new Minister of Sandymount Christchurch, Michael, and myself as the Superintendent of the Circuit we want to make sure that Sandymount Christchurch as a Methodist society works. I'm sure I've made mistakes. I'm sure I've said things that I shouldn't have said, etc. But I want to assure Stephen that Michael and I will, want to work with the folk there and want to make sure that as a Methodist society that it grows and prospers.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else who would like to say anything? So,
I'll ask
Madam
again.
Secretary.
The report has been moved. Conference agreed? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. The next resolution here that I was asked to move was that Conference records its thanks to those who have stepped aside from connection roles or employment within the Methodist Church in Ireland. I mentioned this frequently throughout my presentation, the amount of debt that we owe to people for the work that we do. So this formally records, I ask Conference to formally record its thanks to those who have stepped aside from connection roles or employment.
Thank you. Is Conference agreed? And I will move number 3, that Conference appoints Mr. Tony O'Connor as Chair of the Governance Board.
Say no.
Agreed? Agreed. And I move number 4, that Conference appoints the Governance Board as follows: the President, the lay leader, the General Secretary, the ex-President, the President-designate, the Chair of the Standing Committee of the Trustees, and the Reverends Harold Agnew, David Campton, Nigel Mackey, and Messrs. David Best, John Clark, Paul Cummings, and Tony O'Connor, and Mrs. Laura Griffith, and Mrs. Gillian Kingston. Conference agreed?
The next resolution I have here, and it gives me great pleasure to say this, is the Conference designate the Reverend Dr. Heather Morris as Secretary of Conference for 2023-2024.
Conference agreed?
Agreed. Okay. I have a resolution here which is just a legalistic point, and it's that Conference permits online meetings at society, circuit, district and conference levels and directs that they be properly constituted as per the regulations for in-person meetings as set out in the Manual of Laws and to be recognised as having equal status. This is just to give that dreaded Zoom a little bit of legitimacy.
Conference agreed? Number 7 is John. I now invite John Alderdice to move number 7, 8 and 9.
Mr. Leader, Mr. President, members of Conference, the substantial report of the connectional team, which was passed to the Governance Board, can be found on pages 170 to 173 of the Blue Book. I'm sure you have read it in detail. But in follow-up to what Tony has shared already, we recognise that we continue to be in a space of pragmatism and flexibility in terms of our structures and how various bodies relate to each other within the life of the connection. And the connectional team, which in itself is only a new body over these last couple of years, also has to adapt and change in light of that situation. The role of the connectional team is becoming more strategic in terms of discerning around mission and ministry across the life of the church in trying to coordinate and collaborate both within the body of the team itself, but also with the various entities that it relates to around it. There has been an ongoing discussion in light of that and in light of some of the proposals that you've seen in relation to the role of the connectional team regarding the makeup of the team and what that will look like going forward. And that is why we have resolution number 7 on page 40, which I would now move.
Conference agreed?
And coming to resolutions number 8 and 9, one of the operational roles of the connectional team relates to that of authorisation and dispensation. For the uninitiated, the difference between those two things are that we grant authorisation to local preachers to administer the sacrament within their circuit contexts, but we grant dispensation to probationer ministers who are on the journey towards ordination within their particular context. So first of all, coming to number 8, that conference would grant authorisation to the following local preachers. There is an addition, which was in your order paper, to those 3 names that are there, and that is of Mr. Roy Drenning, that he be granted dispensation on the Springfield and Church Hill circuit. So with that addition, I would move number 8.
Conference agreed?
And then coming to number 9, the question of probationers with dispensation. The details are there, and just for your information, Tanita Lee, her context is in the Ballinafie Circuit's Pioneer Mission work, so I'd be especially grateful if you grant that. So I'd move number 9.
Conference agreed?
And then finally, I've been asked just to point out to members of congregation, we know that there are ongoing conversations in relation to circuit boundaries. And from the 1st of July 2022, you will see there details of 2 circuits, which are 2 new circuits which are being formed from existing circuits from that time. Under point 2, it should say the current 6 circuits with the addition of East Belfast Mission to the list of circuits that is found in the resolution. But that's just really for conference to note. And that's me done.
No, Madam Secretary, please.
So first, if I may be permitted, Mr. Lay Leader, to move some items from here, that would just be helpful, if that's all right. So on the order paper, you'll have noted that there are 2 number 9s on the agenda. So I'm now coming to move what is now 9.2, which relates to the process whereby changes can be made to the Manual of Laws. This is at the bottom of page 40. This proposal relates to how we make these changes. At the moment, sir, if a change relates to the Constitution or to the courts of the Church or connectional committees, we bring a notice of motion in year 1 with the substantive motion to be debated in year 2. This proposal maintains that process for changes to the Constitution, but if conference is minded to pass it, it would allow changes to the courts of the Church and to connectional committees to be addressed in 1 year. We believe that maintains the necessary rigour, but would enable us to implement changes more quickly. So with that, sir, I move 9.2 at the bottom of page 40, that conference approves the changes as to how we make changes to the manual.
Thank you. Conference agreed?
Before I move on to number 10, can I just correct something? I can't actually remember whether I did this during my presentation, but I was supposed to. In the Governance Board report, under the Property Board report, I stated in the written version that the Property Board was a party to the deliberations of the Working Party on property as outlined above and is fully supportive of its recommendations. What I should have said was that the members, what I should have said was that the delegates from the Property Board on the Working Party were fully supportive of its deliberations, of its recommendations. Just a technical change. So my apologies if I didn't mention that earlier on when I should have done. So moving on to the next resolution, which follows on from what Heather was saying. The Church Development Board, we talked about this, about moving its functions over to the connectional team and the superintendents. That normally needs a notion of motion this year for a substantive motion to be discussed next year. This resolution addresses that. So the conference expresses thanks for the work of the Church Development Board over the years. And while receiving the notion of motion to the conference of 2023, it directs that it ceases from July 2022, and that pending the conference discussion of the substantive motion in 2023, that any areas of the CDB's responsibility not already encompassed by the connectional team be transferred to its oversight. So that's just saying that we agree that the CDB will be disbanded, and allowing us to work on that immediately rather than formally waiting for it to be discussed again at conference 2023.
Thank you. Conference agreed?
Mr. Lay Leader, I come then to move number 11, which details the necessary changes to the Manual of Laws, which would follow the ending of the work of the responsibility of the Church Development Board. So those are detailed under number 11. The one to which I want to draw conference's attention is the changes to 759 in the manual. Those are detailed on page 42. Which changes the way in which we deal with the Property Board Development Account. As the Chair of the Governance Board has highlighted, we're moving away from designating church development status, and applications to the Mission Development Account will now be assessed by the connectional team. So we're working within the principle that Mr. O'Connor has highlighted, that property which is being used for missional purposes would be assessed by the connectional team, that the property board become a more technical group. This needs to be followed up in the way in which we fund that work as well. So I simply wanted to highlight that in case anybody wanted to speak to it, but with those comments, move resolution number 11.
Any comments? Then is conference agreed? Thank you.
Mr. Lay Leader, I can continue then. We move to three resolutions which relate to conference membership. Resolution 12 asks the conference to direct the governance board to review the membership of the conference and to bring proposals to the conference of 2023. So I want conference to pause and realise what they're asking here if they accept this resolution. This proposal is coming for a number of reasons. Notable among those is that it's vitally important that conference remains a truly representative body. Conference has a vital role, as Mr. O'Connor has highlighted, not least of holding the governance board accountable. So it's vitally important that conference remains a truly representative body. Second reason that we believe we need to ask for this review of the membership of conference is to do with the circuit changes to which Mr. O'Connor alluded. Circuit changes mean that we now need to look again at how we allocate membership across circuits. As we now stand, if a couple of circuits amalgamate, our current legislation means that actually their representation to conference remains the same, despite the fact that they are actually representing a far larger number of people. We need to look at that so that conference remains representative. So, sir, number 12 is that conference would direct the governance board to undertake the review of conference membership.
Any comments? Conference agreed? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
What about lunch?
Ruth Craig recently retired, and that's one of the reasons I'm standing here, because I just really wonder if the membership of conference is being renewed. Could we possibly look at, rather than ordained ministers being voted into conference with retired, would it be at all possible just to allow all ministers in active work to be a member of conference and then take the vote with those who are retired? Thank you.
Any other comments? That suggestion will be borne in mind then.
Very much so, Mr. Lay Leader, and grateful to Reverend Craig for that feedback, and we will certainly feed that in.
Thank you. Conference agreed?
Number 13, sir, came as a notice of motion to last conference. It's really tidying up and is an interim step. So members of conference who will have gone through this will be noting that just that we're changing, there is no longer a Secretary of the Ordained Ministry Committee, for example. Now, one eagle-eyed member of the conference noted that the number doesn't reflect the numbering that's in the Manual of Laws. And just in case there were other eagle-eyed members of conference who spotted that, that's because this motion motion came as a notice of motion last year, so it reflects last year's numbering. But if conference receives it, that will, of course, be altered. So it's really tidying up, sir. And with that, I move number 13.
Conference agreed. Thank you.
And happy then to move to number 14, which again is an interim measure which seeks to maintain representation through this time of change. And it is simply that in the light of the significant changes to circuit boundaries and the review of conference membership, that the allocation for 23 be made on the basis of circuit boundaries currently in place.
Conference agreed? Agreed. We have still some items of the Governance Board to take. Changes to the manual being brought by the teams and departments, but we shall break now for lunch and take that at the time available, which is just after 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Mr. Lay Leader, may I make one announcement, and that is to ask that those who are involved in leading or reading during We Make the Way by walking go as quickly as they can to the minor hall for a meeting. And I will let you, in your best headmasterly voice, ask that people be back here for 2.
Yes, I was too gentle when I asked you to come back at 11:30. So would you be back here, please, at 1:55? Thank you.